The great gates of the Star Realm courtroom opened with a deep chime that rolled through the air, like distant thunder. Sunlight from the high glass ceiling spilled over polished floors of white stone. The walls were shaped from silver panels that reflected the light in soft waves, giving the entire place a calm glow. It was not just a building. This was the center of power for half the known galaxy, and every person who stepped inside felt its weight. Rian stepped through the gates. With steady steps, his eyes fixed ahead. He was a human from one of the outer colonies, dressed in a plain but clean coat of deep blue, with a thin band of silver on the collar to mark his role as an envoy. His face was calm, but each step he took seemed to draw more attention. The nobles seated along the sides of the chamber leaned forward, their long robes brushing the floor. They had never seen a human walk in with such certainty, especially not on a day when the king himself sat in judgment. Beside Rian walked Princess Alara of Velis Prime. Her gown was made of layered green silk that shimmered like the leaves of the tall crystal trees found in her world's royal gardens. She walked with quiet grace, her chin slightly raised, her dark hair flowing behind her. There was no fear in her steps. The sound of her soft shoes echoed in the stillness of the great room. The nobles did not speak loudly, but a low hum of whispers moved like a wave through the chamber. Questions passed from one to another. Why had the human come here? Why was the princess with him? And why was she not seated beside her father on the throne? At the far end of the courtroom, the king of Velis sat high on his crystal throne. The throne was carved from a single block of pale blue stone, set with small lines of gold that caught the light. His crown rested lightly on his head, a simple band of polished silver. His robes were heavy and rich in color, deep purple and gold. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. Following each step the human and the princess took, Rian's steps echoed clearly now. He could feel the eyes of every person in the room on his back. But he had prepared for this day. He had walked through deserts of red sand and across cold metal corridors of starships to reach this place. He knew the weight of the law here. He knew that once a case was brought before the court, the king could not stop it, not even if it involved his own daughter. Alara kept pace with him, her hands folded in front of her. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She had chosen to come with him. She had known the risk, and yet she had stepped through those gates without hesitation. The two stopped at the center of the great circular floor, where a faint pattern of old symbols was etched into the stone. It was the place where those who sought judgment stood. Above them, the high ceiling seemed to stretch into the sky. A court herald, wearing the white and gold of the realm, stepped forward and spoke in a clear voice that carried across the room. Envoy Rian of the human colonies seeks audience with the court of Velis. Accompanying him is Her Highness, Princess Alara of Velis Prime. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some nobles leaned closer, eyes wide. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. The herald stepped back, and for a moment, there was only silence. Then the king spoke. His voice was deep, steady, and without visible emotion. You stand in this court with my daughter at your side. What matter do you bring before the realm? Rian looked up toward the throne. His voice was firm, but respectful. I come to speak of a law older than the crown on your head. I come to speak of an agreement between our peoples that has been forgotten. More whispers spread. The words agreement and forgotten seemed to spark interest among the nobles. The king's gaze shifted briefly toward Alara. Her face remained still, but her eyes met his without wavering. He did not speak further, for the law of the court was clear. Once the envoy had claimed the right to be heard, the session had to proceed. Even a king could not cut it short. Rian felt the air grow heavier as the silence returned. This was the moment he had counted on. The old law, known only to those who studied the earliest days of the realm, gave him this chance. It did not matter if the case displeased the court. It did not matter if it made the king himself uncomfortable. Once begun, the trial would run its course. Alara shifted slightly beside him, her voice soft but certain. They will listen, she whispered. Her words meant only for him. Rian gave the faintest nod. The journey had been long, but they had reached the heart of power. Now, The truth would have a voice. The chamber doors closed behind them with a slow, heavy sound. There was no turning back. The judges, seated in a half-circle of carved stone chairs to the right of the king, watched in silence. Their robes were simple compared to the nobles, marked only by a single gold band at the collar. One of them, an elder with silver hair, leaned slightly forward, studying the human and the princess with sharp eyes. The herald stepped forward again, reading aloud the formal start of the session. His words described the authority of the court, the weight of its decisions, and the duty of all present to speak truth without fear. As the herald spoke, Rian looked around the room once more. He saw the faces of the nobles, some curious, some clearly annoyed, others hiding their expressions. He saw the tall windows along the sides of the chamber, showing the city beyond, where towers of crystal and steel rose into the clouds. This was a place built on tradition, and tradition could be a powerful shield. He also saw the king, sitting perfectly still. The ruler's hands rested on the arms of his throne, fingers curling slightly but never tightening. His gaze remained locked on them. Rian took a slow breath. Every step, every word from this point on would shape what happened next. He was no soldier, no commander of fleets. But in this moment, standing in the center of the Star Realm courtroom with the princess at his side, he carried the hopes of his people. And for the first time in many years, the law of Veles would be tested in full view of its ruler. The herald finished speaking, and the elder judge's voice broke the silence. This court is now in session. The envoy may speak. Rian stepped forward, ready to begin. The air inside the courtroom felt different now. Every word spoken seemed to rest heavily in the space between the polished stone floor and the high glass ceiling. It was not only the nobles who watched Rian and Princess Alara, it was the law itself, a law so ancient that even the king had to obey it. The courtroom of Veles followed a rule older than the current dynasty. Once a case was formally brought forward and acknowledged by the judges, it had to continue until the last word was spoken. No person, no matter their title or power, could stop it. It was the one tradition that had remained unchanged for centuries, and Rian had come to use that very rule to his advantage. The elder judge who had called the session leaned back in his stone chair, his eyes never leaving the human envoy. You may speak. Envoy Rian, the court will hear your claim. Rian took a step forward so that his voice could carry across the chamber without strain. I come before this court not to accuse a person, but to bring forward the truth of an agreement between the humans of the outer colonies and the people of Veles Prime. This agreement has been left forgotten for far too long, and the lives of many have been made harder because of it. The nobles shifted in their seats. The rustle of silk and the soft clink of jewelry filled the silence. Some looked curious, but others seemed unsettled by his words. The king's eyes narrowed slightly, though his face remained calm. He spoke with measured tone. You claim to bring a matter of law, but you stand with my daughter beside you. Why does she take part in this? Alara raised her head and spoke clearly so that all could hear. I am here because I have seen the records with my own eyes. What he says is true. A wave of whispers swept through the chamber. It was unusual for a member of the royal family to speak so directly. In the early moments of a trial, some nobles glanced at each other as if wondering what it might mean for the king's own daughter to stand beside a human envoy in such a way. Rian continued. The agreement was signed more than 200 years ago, when the first human colony ships entered Veles space. It promised peaceful passage, equal trade, and fair treatment for settlers in exchange for human cooperation in matters of exploration and resource sharing. For decades, this agreement was honored, but in recent years, its terms have been quietly set aside. A noble dressed in deep green stood abruptly. If such a treaty exists, where is the proof? Words are not enough in this court. Alara's voice was steady. The proof exists. It is recorded on the royal crystal tablets stored in the deepest chamber of the library. I retrieved them myself. Another noble, this one in silver, frowned. And why would you involve yourself in matters that belong to the council? Alara's answer was firm. Because the treaty was made not only with the council, but with the royal family itself. Our word is bound to it. The elder judge raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent. Again, if the princess claims she has seen such evidence, the court will require that it be examined. Until then, the envoy may continue the statement. Rian nodded respectfully to the judge. He knew he had to move carefully. The humans of the outer colonies have faced heavy trade taxes, travel restrictions, and the loss of protection in regions once guarded by the Velis fleet. These are clear violations of the agreement. Many settlements are struggling because they can no longer move goods freely, and some are cut off entirely from essential supplies. The nobles listened with a mix of expressions, some skeptical, others thoughtful. The mention of human hardship did not move everyone in the same way. For some, the colonies were distant places they would never visit, and their people were strangers. But others in the court seemed aware that the matter was more than a local issue. Trade routes connected worlds, and a disruption for one could mean trouble for many. The king shifted slightly in his throne. His voice was calm, but there was a sharpness beneath the words. You speak of taxes and restrictions, but these are matters for the council to decide. Why bring this before the royal court? Rian met the king's gaze without hesitation. Because the treaty is a royal promise, sealed by the throne itself. Only the court can confirm its place in the law and ensure it is upheld. A pause followed. The king did not answer right away. Around the chamber, nobles seemed to realize what Rian was truly doing. He was forcing the court to acknowledge the treaty in a place where no interruption could stop him. One of the younger judges spoke. The envoy is correct. If the treaty was made under royal authority, its standing is a matter for this court. The elder judge nodded in agreement, and so it will be heard in full. For a brief moment, the king's fingers tightened on the arm of his throne. It was not a gesture of anger, but of careful control. The law of the court allowed no exceptions. The case would continue, no matter the discomfort it brought. Rian stepped back slightly, allowing the moment to settle. He could feel the air. The room shift again, like the quiet before a storm. Alara glanced toward him, her expression calm but her eyes showing a hint of relief. She had worried that the court might try to dismiss the case early, but now the path forward was secure. The elder judge spoke again. The next step will be to review the evidence. The court will require the crystal tablets, the official records, and any witness statements you wish to present. Until then, the matter stands in active session. A few nobles murmured in discontent, but none could oppose the ruling. The unspoken rule had been followed, and once a trial began under these terms, there was no escape from its process. Rian inclined his head to the judges. I will provide all that is needed. The king's gaze did not leave them as the judges signaled the close of this first hearing. The trial was not yet over. It had only begun. As Rian and Alara stepped away from the center of the chamber, the sound of whispers followed them. The nobles would speak of this moment long after the day ended. Rian knew the real challenge lay ahead. The evidence would have to be presented in a way that no one could dismiss, and the court would need to be convinced to honor promises made centuries ago. But for now, they had secured what they came for: time to speak, and a chance to be heard. Outside the courtroom, the vast plaza stretched beneath the glow of the city's crystal towers. The sun was lower in the sky now, casting warm light across the white stone. Rian looked up at the tallest tower in the distance, knowing that each step from here would be harder than the last. Alara stood beside him, her voice low but certain. The law is with us now. The rest is in how we use it. Rian nodded. The unspoken rule had opened the door. Now, they would have to walk through it together. The next day, the court reconvened in the grand chamber. The silver walls gleamed under the soft light, and the same quiet tension hung in the air. The nobles writhed in their flowing robes, whispering to one another as they took their seats. Some seemed eager for the session to continue. Others looked wary, as if they feared where the matter might lead. Rian stood at the center of the room once more, the ancient symbols on the floor beneath his boots. Beside him, Princess Alara carried a narrow case made of polished black stone. She held it with both hands, her expression calm, though her eyes showed a trace of focus. The elder judge signaled for silence. Envoy Rian, You may present your evidence. The court will examine it. Rian stepped forward. What I bring today is not only the memory of a promise, but the record of it. This agreement between the humans of the outer colonies and the Velis realm was signed centuries ago, at a time when our worlds first met in peace. The terms were clear, and the words were carved in a form that could not fade. Alara stepped closer and placed the case on a small stand provided by the court. With careful hands, she pressed a hidden latch. The case opened, revealing 5 thin crystal tablets. They were faintly blue in color and glowed softly under the chamber light. The edges were etched with the mark of the royal seal, unmistakable. And unchanged in all these years, the nobles leaned forward, even from their seats. They could see the fine lines carved into the surface of each tablet lines that formed words in both the Velis and human languages. Alara spoke clearly. These were kept in the deepest archive of the royal library, where only the family and a few archivists may go. I found them by searching for records from the first contact period. They were not hidden with malice, but forgotten under layers of newer agreements. One of the younger nobles asked, if they were forgotten, why bring them forward now? Rian answered without hesitation, because forgetting them has allowed injustice to grow. The promises made here protected human settlers from unfair restrictions. They allowed for free travel and fair exchange of goods. Without them, the colonies have suffered. These tablets are not simply history. They are living law. The elder judge signaled to a court archivist, who stepped forward to examine them. Tablets, the archivist, an older man with a calm face, traced the carvings with gloved fingers and then nodded. The seal is genuine. The carvings match the style and method used during the signing. Era, there is no sign of alteration. A ripple moved through the chamber. Even those who had doubted could not ignore the words of the archivist. The king spoke for the first time since the evidence was revealed. The court acknowledges that the tablets are genuine. Yet a treaty is only as strong as its place in the present law. If it has been replaced or altered by later agreements, it may not stand. Alara's voice was firm. The treaty was never replaced. It was never canceled. Later agreements were made in its shadow, but none removed its terms by the law of Velis. An unbroken treaty remains in force. The elder judge looked toward the king. Her Highness is correct. Unless the court finds evidence of lawful cancellation, the agreement stands as binding. A murmur ran through the nobles again. Some looked troubled, others thoughtful. Rian took a slow breath and continued. The words on these tablets speak not only of trade and travel, but of partnership. They promised that when either side faced hardship, the other would help. This was not only a contract of goods, but of trust. When the colonies first settled in Velis space, they were given safe routes, fuel support, and aid in times of shortage. But over the years, these acts of goodwill faded. In their place came walls and tariffs. The promise of help was replaced by silence. He paused, letting the words settle. Many in the court avoided his gaze, but others met it directly. Alara added softly, I have walked through the halls of the library where our history is stored. I have read of the first day when humans arrived. They were strangers, yet welcomed as friends. Our people learned from theirs, and theirs from ours. It is written on the tablets that both would rise together. This was not the dream of one ruler, but the will of the people then. It should still be the will of the people now. The elder judge leaned back in his seat. The court has heard the words of the envoy and the princess. We will review the tablets in detail before making a judgment. But know this, if the treaty remains valid, the realm will be bound to honor it. A noble in deep gold robes stood. If we accept this treaty, will it not place burden upon our current systems? The taxes, the regulations, they were built over many years. Rian faced him calmly. If those systems break the promise made here, then they must be changed. That is the meaning of law. To uphold what is right, not only what is convenient. Some nobles nodded slightly at this, others frowned. The division in the chamber was clear. The elder judge rose from his seat, signaling the session's end for the day. The court will study the evidence and hear further statements tomorrow. Until then, the tablets will be secured within the court vault under guard. 2 guards in white and gold stepped forward to take the case. They carried it with care, walking toward the vault door at the side of the chamber. The sound of the locking mechanism echoed softly as it closed as the nobles filed out. Their conversations filled the air, soft but urgent. They spoke of old promises, of human settlements, of what it would mean if the court ruled in the envoys' favor. Rian and Alara stood together until the chamber was almost empty. The king had already left through a private door, his expression unreadable. When the room was nearly silent, Alara turned to Rian. The court believes us now, but belief is not enough. Tomorrow, they will decide whether the treaty lives or dies. Rian nodded slowly. Then tomorrow, we must make sure they see it not as a relic, but as a promise worth keeping. The two walked out into the plaza, the cool evening air washing over them. The crystal towers glimmered in the fading light, and the city seemed both beautiful and distant. Rian knew the hardest part was yet to come. They had shown the court the truth. Now, they would have to make them feel its weight. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning. The air felt still, as if even the high glass ceiling held its breath. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shapes across the polished stone floor. Rian stood near the center once again, but today he was not the one who would speak first. The attention of the court was fixed on Princess Alara. She was dressed in a simple gown of pale blue silk, without the jewels or ornate headpieces normally worn by royalty. Even so, her presence carried a quiet authority. The elder judge called the court to order. This day, the court will hear the testimony of Her Highness, Princess Alara of Veles Prime. A murmur ran through the nobles. It was rare for a member of the royal family to speak under oath in the grand chamber. Some seemed curious, others uneasy. All eyes followed Alara as she walked to the small speaking platform. At the center of the circle of judges, she began in a calm voice. I have come here not out of duty to my family, but out of duty to truth. The matter before this court is not only about law, it is about the promise our people made, a promise that has been left to fade. The judges listened without interruption. The law required that every word be heard. I have walked the halls of the royal library since I was a child, she continued, in its deepest chambers. There are shelves that have not been touched for generations. It was there that I found the crystal tablets shown to you yesterday. They were covered in layers of dust, yet the words upon them were clear. The treaty they hold is not merely a trade agreement, it is a bond between our peoples. One noble raised a hand slightly. Princess, if the treaty was so important, why did you not speak of it sooner? Alara's gaze was steady. Because I did not know it existed until I found it. Once I read it, I could not remain silent. The treaty promised friendship, equal exchange, and mutual protection. It promised that neither side would impose unfair burdens on the other. These words are carved into the crystal. They cannot be erased by time or by choice. She turned toward the judges, her voice gaining strength. In the past decades, humans of the outer colonies have been treated as outsiders within the very space where this promise was made. They face taxes and restrictions that were never part of the agreement. They are denied the aid that was once freely given. This is not only a breach of law, it is a breach of honor. The elder judge leaned forward slightly. Your Highness, do you have proof beyond the tablets? Alara nodded. I have records of travel logs, trade shipments, and council decrees from the past 50 years. They show the steady rise of restrictions on human settlements. These restrictions do not exist for other allied worlds. Only humans have been treated this way. She motioned to an attendant, who brought forward a series of thin metal data sheets. They were placed on a low table in front of the judges. The sheets glowed faintly as the information scrolled across them, columns of numbers, shipping routes, and official decrees. One of the younger judges studied them closely. These appear authentic, he said after a moment. They match the style of our official records. The elder judge nodded. Continue, Princess. Alara's voice softened slightly, though it still carried across the chamber. I have also spoken to humans from the colonies. Some I met when they visited our markets. Others I contacted through secure channels. They told me of shortages that could have been prevented, of ships delayed for weeks at checkpoints, of supplies taxed so heavily that they could no longer trade fairly. These are not the acts of a people honoring their word. The chamber was silent except for her voice. Even the nobles who had seemed doubtful now listened more closely. I stand here not against my father, nor against this realm, she said. I stand for the law we swore to uphold. If we turn away from this treaty, we tell the galaxy that our promises are temporary, that our honor is fragile. But if we uphold it, we show that the word of Velis remains strong, even across centuries. She looked toward Rion for a moment, then back to the judges. The humans have kept their side of the promise. They have shared their knowledge, their trade, and their trust. It is time we do the same. The elder judge's voice was calm but thoughtful. Your Highness, you understand that by speaking here, you place yourself in the center of this matter. If the court rules against the treaty, your position may be questioned. Alara did not hesitate. If my position is worth anything, it is worth using to protect what is right. A quiet murmur rose among the nobles again. Some glanced toward the king's throne, where the ruler sat still as stone, his expression unreadable. The elder judge raised his hand for silence. The court thanks the princess for her testimony. It will be added to the record and considered alongside the treaty and the envoy's evidence. Alara stepped down from the platform and rejoined Rion at the center of the chamber. The two stood side by side as the next stage of the session began. The king finally spoke, his deep voice carrying easily through the hall. The court has heard my daughter's words in the envoy's case. But before we speak of rulings, we must also hear from those who oppose this claim. Only then can the court weigh the matter fully. A noble in gold stood. I will speak against it, he said, not out of malice, but out of concern for the stability of the realm. If we restore this treaty, we must also change much of our trade law. That will cause disruption. Another noble in silver added, and yet, if the treaty is law, we cannot ignore it without weakening our own courts. This is not a simple matter. The discussion began to grow, voices rising and falling as points were made and challenged. But through it all, Rion and Alara remained silent. They had spoken their truths. Now the court would wrestle with them. By the time the elder judge called an end to the day's hearing, the chamber was filled with low conversation and thoughtful expressions. The decision was not yet made, but something in the air had shifted. The treaty was no longer just an old piece of history, it was a living question that the court could not ignore. As Rion and Alara left the courtroom together, the evening light spilling across the plaza, she glanced at him. They heard us, she said quietly. Rion nodded. Now we see if hearing is enough. The crystal towers of the city caught the last light of the day, and the shadows stretched long. The next hearing would bring more voices, more arguments, and perhaps the turning point they needed. The courtroom felt heavier that morning. Even the light from the crystal ceiling seemed dimmer, as if the day itself understood the tension. Rion stood at the center once more, the alien Princess Lior at his side. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Whispers moved through the crowd like waves, but they all silenced when the clerk announced the start. The king remained in his seat, still bound by the strange law that prevented him from interfering in a matter brought formally to trial. His eyes, however, never left his daughter. They were sharp and watchful, but beneath them was a shadow of unease. Today, the council of voices would present their side. Rion knew they had prepared for weeks, searching for every flaw in his claims. They would attempt to twist the truth and turn public opinion back in their favor. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of every word he might say. The first counselor to step forward was an older alien named Vroon. His posture was proud, his robe embroidered with silver threads that caught the light. He began in a calm tone, explaining how the council had long protected the people from chaos. He argued that the princess was never in danger, that the humans' arrival had stirred unrest unnecessarily. Rion did not interrupt. He let Vroon speak, let the audience hear the smooth words that danced carefully around the truth. But when the time came for him to reply, he stepped forward with a quiet strength. He spoke of the night he found Lior in the outer settlements, surrounded by guards who claimed they were escorting her for her safety. He described how she had begged for help, how her own voice trembled with fear. He reminded the court that no law allowed the council to take the princess away without royal consent. Varun tried to challenge his story, asking for proof. That was when Rian motioned to the small silver cube on the table beside him. It was a recorder from his ship, one of humanity's most reliable devices. With a tap, the cube projected a clear image into the air. Gasps filled the courtroom as they saw the events exactly as Rian described. Leora's voice, soft yet desperate, filled the space. Her eyes in the recording were wide with fear as she spoke the words that could not be ignored. "Please, help me." The gallery stirred. Some looked at the king, others at the council. The councilors shifted in their seats. Varun's calm expression cracked, just for a moment. But the council was not ready to yield. Another member, a younger alien named Selith, stepped forward. She claimed the recording could be a trick, a fabrication by human technology. Her voice was sharp, and she hinted that humans had motives beyond helping the princess. Rian did not raise his voice, but he looked directly at Selith and asked one question: if I wished to deceive, would I have risked standing in this courtroom, under your laws, before your king? Selith hesitated. In this court, lies carried serious punishment, and everyone knew it. The princess then took a step forward. Her presence commanded silence. She spoke slowly, clearly. She confirmed every detail Rian had given. She explained how the council had claimed to act in her interest but had kept her isolated, controlling her movements and silencing her requests to contact her father. The king's grip on the armrest tightened, but still, he said nothing. When Leora finished, there was a long pause. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Then the chief judge, an elder alien named Arvin, leaned forward. His voice was deep and even as he asked the council to explain why the princess had been kept in the outer settlements for so long. Varun began to speak again, but his words faltered. The councilors exchanged uncertain looks. Their arguments sounded thinner now, the earlier confidence gone. Arvin's gaze moved to Rian. "And you, human," he said, "why have you risked your life for someone not of your kind?" Rian thought of the long journey, the dangers he had faced, and the moments when turning back would have been easier. He answered simply, "Because truth matters, no matter whose it is, and because she asked for help." Those words seemed to ripple through the room, for the first time since the trial began. The king's stern expression softened. There was a flicker of respect in his eyes still. The trial was far from over. The council had one final witness, someone they claimed could disprove Rian's account. The courtroom doors opened, and an alien cloaked in deep blue entered. His face was hidden by a hood, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. He claimed to have been in the outer settlements that night and insisted that the princess had been willingly under the council's care. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Rian felt the eyes of the court turn to him, waiting for his reply. He took a step forward, looking directly at the hooded figure. Something in the way the witness avoided meeting his gaze felt wrong. "Then why," Rian asked, "did you hide your face to speak the truth?" The witness did not answer immediately. A murmur rose from the gallery. Even the chief judge seemed to lean in. Rian knew this moment could shift the balance entirely. He had more evidence, but using it now could end the trial swiftly or risk losing the final day's advantage. He glanced at Leora, and she gave a small nod, as if telling him to trust his instincts. He turned back to the judge. "I request that the witness remove the hood before answering." The chief judge considered this, then agreed slowly. The figure lowered the hood, revealing a familiar face. It was someone Rian had seen before, not in the settlements, but in the council's own chambers during his first arrival. The gallery erupted with noise. The realization spread quickly. The witness was not an impartial observer, but a council member in disguise. The chief judge's voice cut through the noise, ordering silence. His eyes narrowed on the council. "This will be addressed," he said firmly. The council's position weakened further. The king remained silent, but his gaze on them was now sharp and cold. Rian stood quietly, knowing the day had ended in his favor, but also knowing the council would not give up easily. The final day of the trial would decide everything. And somewhere Deep in his thoughts, he wondered if winning the case was enough or if something far greater was at stake. The courtroom was silent when Rian and Princess Leora returned from the archives. The heavy doors closed behind them with a sound that echoed through the hall. All eyes turned toward them, curious to see what they carried in their hands, and Rian's grip was a small crystal cube glowing faintly with an inner light. It was the proof they had risked so much to find. The king sat on his high seat, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. Around him the council members whispered to each other, wondering why the human had come back instead of being turned away. Rian stepped forward. His voice was steady as he spoke to the council. This is not just a relic. It is a record of every treaty signed between humans and your people. It shows the truth about what happened years ago and why the princess should not be forced into the alliance you planned. A council elder frowned. And why should we believe that a human would bring us truth? Many in this chamber still think you came here only for your own gain. Princess Leora moved beside Rian. Her calm voice carried across the room. Because I was there when we found it, I saw the recordings inside. They matched the events I was told about as a child, not the ones the current court claims happened. If we ignore this, we ignore our own history. The king's gaze stayed fixed on Rian, but he did not speak. His stillness made it clear he was waiting for someone else to challenge them. A tall council member in a silver robe stood up. If what you say is true, then this device will prove it. But understand, human, that bringing such evidence without permission is considered interference in our royal affairs. Rian met the man's stare. Then call it interference if you wish. But if you care about justice, you will look at the truth before you decide anyone's fate. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Some members looked uneasy, while others leaned forward with interest. The tension was growing, but Rian did not back down. He placed the crystal cube on the council's projection stand. The device lit up the room with soft light, displaying images and voices from the past. The recordings showed the original agreement between humans and the alien royal family. It showed how both sides had promised fairness and respect, and how the current plan for the princess broke those promises. The elders watched closely. Some nodded slowly as the scenes unfolded. The truth was no longer hidden in dusty archives. It was in front of everyone. But not everyone was pleased. A man in dark green armor, one of the king's closest guards, stepped forward. Your Majesty, this could be a human trick. We cannot let outsiders decide our law. Princess Leora's voice was firm. This is not about outsiders. This is about my people being misled. This is about our promises being broken. The king finally rose from his seat. His deep voice filled the chamber. Enough. We will not dismiss evidence before it is fully examined. The human has risked much to bring this forward. Whether the first like it or not, the law demands we review it. For the first time since entering the room, Rian felt a small shift in the air. The king's words had opened a door that others could not easily close. The council announced that the evidence would be studied overnight, and a final decision would be given the next day. Guards were assigned to watch the crystal cube so no one could tamper with it. As they were escorted out of the courtroom, Leora turned to Rian. This is not over yet, but now they cannot pretend they never heard the truth. Rian nodded. That was the goal. Now we just need to make sure they do the right thing. Outside, the sky was painted in deep shades of gold and blue. The city below was restless, as rumors about the courtroom spread quickly through the streets. People wanted to know if the human had really challenged the king, and if the princess had truly stood by his side. In the distance, Rian could see the great spire where the council archives stood. Somewhere inside, more records and secrets waited to be found. But for now, the crystal cube was enough to change the course of what was coming. They walked away from the courtroom together, but both knew that the final day would be the hardest. The truth was now out in the open, and it was up to the council to either honor it or hide it again. And in the shadow of the royal palace, unseen eyes were already watching, deciding what to do before the judgment came. The courtroom was silent. Every seat was filled. The grand pillars of the hall rose high, and the golden banners of the kingdom swayed slightly in the air. The air felt heavy with expectation. Rian stood at the center, the alien princess beside him. Her name was Leora. She looked calm, but her hands were clasped tightly together. Across from them sat the king on his raised throne, his face unreadable. The trial had lasted for days. Witnesses had spoken, documents had been shown, and arguments had been made. The issue was simple yet powerful. Leora had come to Earth for a peaceful agreement, but certain members of her royal council had accused her of betrayal. They wanted her brought back to her planet for judgment. Rian had argued that she should be judged here, where the truth could be shown without bias. Today, the verdict would be given. The chief judge, a tall figure in silver robes, stepped forward. His voice was steady. After careful review of all evidence and testimony, this court has reached a decision. Princess Leora has not committed the crimes accused of her. She will remain free. The words echoed through the hall. A wave of relief spread across Rian's face. Leora's eyes widened and a soft smile formed. But the king did not move. He sat in silence, his hands resting on the arms of his throne. His advisors whispered to him, yet he did not reply. Everyone knew he had wanted the decision to go the other way. His silence now was his only protest. The people in the courtroom began to stand, some clapping softly. Others looked unsure, knowing this verdict would create ripples far beyond these walls. Leora turned to Rian. You believed in me when no one else would. I will never forget this. Rian nodded. The truth had to win, and now it has. They stepped out of the hall together, the bright light of the day washing over them. Outside, a crowd had gathered. News of the trial had spread across the city. People cheered as they walked past, though some voices in the crowd spoke with doubt. Not everyone trusted the decision, but many saw it as a sign of hope. As they walked, Rian spoke quietly. This is not the end. There will be those who will still try to change this outcome. Leora agreed. Yes, but now I know I have an ally, and more importantly, I have a friend. Far above the city, in the royal palace tower, the king watched from a tall window. He could not intervene without breaking the laws of his own realm. For the first time in many years, he realized he had underestimated humans. Rian had not only defended Leora, but had also shown the court and the people that justice could stand even against power. That night, a small celebration took place in a quiet corner of the city. It was not grand, but it was warm. Rian, Leora, and a few close friends gathered to share a meal. They spoke of the trial, of the future, and of the strange path that had brought them together. Leora promised that when she returned to her world, she would carry this story with her. She would tell her people how a human had stood against the king's will to protect what was right. Rian promised he would visit her world one day, not as a fighter or judge, but as a friend and a guest. When the night grew late, they stood outside, looking at the stars. The sky was clear, and among the constellations, Leora pointed to a faint light. That is my home, she said softly. Rian looked at it and smiled. One day, I will see it. In that moment, they both understood that this trial had not just been about clearing a name. It had been about building a bridge between two worlds. And though the king's shadow still loomed over them, they knew they had taken the first step towards something greater. The next morning, messages began to arrive from across the galaxy. Some were offers of friendship, others were cautious warnings. But all of them spoke of the same thing. The human who had brought an alien princess to a courtroom and left with more than just a verdict. Rian walked through the city, feeling the weight of what had happened. The streets were alive with talk. Merchants spoke of trade with distant planets. Children pretended to be travelers between stars. The idea of a shared future had taken root. Back in the royal palace, the king met with his advisors. They spoke in low voices, planning how to respond to this shift in power. But deep down, the king knew that something had changed forever. Humans were no longer just observers in the galaxy. They were participants, and some, like Rian, could not be controlled by crowns or thrones. The story of the trial began to spread far beyond the city. On distant worlds, in quiet villages, and bustling ports, people whispered about the human who had challenged a king and won. Some called it luck, others called it fate. But those who understood saw it for what it was, proof that courage and truth could shape the course of history. And so, Rian and Leora continued their journey. They knew challenges lay ahead, but they also knew they had already faced the most powerful force in the kingdom and stood there. Ground, whatever came next. They would face it together. The trial was over. The verdict had been given. But the real story was only beginning.